Before you toss those white paper scraps in the bin, hang on just a second, because what if I told you they're not trash? They're actually creative gold. Stick with me because you're not going to believe what these scraps can turn into. Let's get into it. I used to keep every little scrap thinking I'd use them someday, but let's be real. Most of the time, they just sat there piling up until one day during my regular craft room reset, I looked at this ridiculous stack of white paper scraps and thought,
Okay, Tiffany, it's time to either use them or let them go.
and that's where the first idea started. What if I can turn those scraps into something practical and, most importantly, something that would actually help me use more of my stash? So the first thing I did was grab a handful of those white paper scraps and started stamping out some of my most used sentiments, things like thinking of you, hello, and just because, and other go-to phrases I always seem to need mid-project. And honestly, this is such a good moment to shop your stash. Pull out those stamps you love, the ones you reach for all the time, or even the ones that you bought and still haven't used yet. No judgment here, because I've got plenty of those too. Now, once I had all the sentiments stamped, I moved on to die cutting. Same idea here, I'm keeping it simple and sticking to my go-to shapes. For me, that usually means a lot of leaves and greenery. I definitely use them all the time, and honestly, I'm not mad about it because I'm getting the most out of my stash. I know sometimes we feel like we have to switch it up constantly, but I get the most out of my stash with things I truly love. So that's what I'm using here. And just like that, I've got a little stash of stamped sentiments and die cuts ready to go whenever inspiration strikes. I put them right next to me in this drawer, so I never lose them. All right, now we're going to take it up a notch with some ink and texture. You're really going to love how easy this is and how cool it turns out. This next technique is one to come back to again and again because it's just that versatile. And honestly, the possibilities are endless. You're going to start by grabbing your white paper scraps, especially the ones if they vary in width, that's even better. That's going to mix it up and adds more visual interest in the final card. Now, instead of lining them up perfectly, I like to embrace a little imperfection here. I offset the strips and adhere them to the card panel slightly wonky. Do not overthink it. Once all the strips are in place, it's time to add some ink to the embossing folder, and this is where it gets really fun. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. If you apply the ink to the top side of the folder, the side that presses down, you'll end up with the raised design showing in white, like I did here. But if you want the design itself to be colored, then apply the ink to the bottom side of the folder instead. Either method gives you a totally unique look, and honestly, I love doing both. I like to softly blend the ink out a little bit before embossing so there aren't any harsh edges, but that's totally optional. Next, I give a folder a light mist of water and run it through my die cut machine. To finish off the card panel, I'm going to add some white splatters using Dina Wakley gloss spray. It's one of my favorite ways to add that final mixed media touch. Then I'm going to trim down the panel, grab one of those pre-stamped sentiments we made earlier, pop it on, and just like that, you've got a finished card. Now here's another variation of pretty much the same technique that I absolutely love. Try placing your strips just on the bottom portion of the card panel, run that through your embossing folder, and then this time apply ink only to the raised area at the bottom of the card panel. This is going to give you a really striking contrast, and it still leaves space at the top for a focal point. I'm going to finish mine off with a simple die cut and sentiment, and again, a totally different look from the same basic idea. There are truly countless ways to do this technique, and I cannot wait to see what you come up with. Now, don't go anywhere just yet, because this next technique is what inspired this entire video, and it's a game changer if you love color. And it is easily one of my favorites because we're going to be using sprays. Now, I've done this technique a few times before, and I even teach a version of it in my Backgrounds Reimagined class. And I will link that class below if you want to dive in deeper and use up all of those backgrounds you have. All right, so for this technique, we're actually going to be starting with white paper strips and add color to them using sprays. But before we begin, it's really important to mention you'll want to use paper that holds up well to moisture, like watercolor paper or mixed media paper. I like to use Strathmore mixed media paper. Cheap cardstock will not work, and you definitely will not get the same results. So let's talk a little bit about the colors because it is a beautiful color combination and it was actually shared by one of my students in the private Facebook group. I instantly fell in love with it. I will have all the sprays listed in this video right here and down below in the supply list. I'm going to randomly spray the colors over the strips, making sure each one looks a little bit different. I add the color and then spritz a little bit of water, dry, and repeat until I get the look that I want. No two strips are exactly the same, and that's the beauty of this. So originally I started layering my strips directly on a gel plate to spray them, but honestly it didn't work out quite how I wanted it. The color pulled up underneath and left some muddy spots. So what I ended up doing is breaking out my cooling racks. I switched to those partway through and I highly recommend them. And I'll have those linked down below if you're interested. They keep the paper slightly elevated, which allows the strips to dry faster and helps avoid the pooling issue. Once the strips are done and dry, I adhere them onto a thin card panel. I alternate the colors as I go, trying not to place similar shades right next to each other. This is going to give more contrast and visual interest in the end. If you want to fill a full A2 size panel, you'll need longer strips. But if you're working with smaller scraps, here's a tip. Cut your 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 panel in half on the short side, right at 2 3/4 inches. That's going to give you 2 smaller panels that you can work with. Once your strips are adhered, run the whole piece through your die cut machine with an embossing folder. I'm going to be using this beautiful leaf design here. I love how it's kind of just in the center of the card panel. Then comes my favorite part. I take white pigment ink and lightly swipe it across the raised areas. It highlights the texture and really brings the whole panel to life. This has become one of my favorite go-to techniques for using up white paper scraps. It's colorful, creative, and such a fun way to turn those leftovers into something beautiful. I actually decided to keep these card panels blank so I can turn them into quick cards later on. Just pop on whatever sentiment I need in the moment. To finish them off, I'm going to add some white splatters using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I like to thin it out with a little bit of water so it splatters more easily. Once that's dry, I adhere the panels to a card base, and just like that, I've got a few backgrounds ready to go for any occasion. Now, this last idea is especially for my mixed media lovers, so don't go anywhere. And if you've got embossing glaze around, you're going to love this one. We're going to be doing some stamping directly onto all of these white paper scraps. And definitely use what you have on hand. I've got a mix of sizes here, smaller strips that I'll turn into faux washi tape later on, and some larger pieces I'm going to be creating some embellishment clusters for future mixed media projects. This is such a simple technique, but it's a great way to get more out of your stash and finally give those paper scraps a purpose. You're going to start with a strip of white paper and stamp over it using archival ink. I go for a collage style look. I'm going to be using different numbers, textures, my script stamp, and anything with visual interest. Then I'm going to splatter a little bit of water and then sprinkle on some of that embossing glaze. The embossing glaze is going to stick to that water. I like to use different colors to add variation and depth. Another fun option is to cover the entire strip with Versamark ink and glaze the whole thing. It creates this beautifully layered colored effect that makes your stamped images really pop. If you are new to using embossing glaze, you do have to heat set these. I like to use an embossing tool. It gets really hot and melts the embossing glaze fast. And if you want to take it a step further, try this on a larger panel and die cut shapes from it. These make really awesome little embellishment clusters for mixed media cards, art journals, really anything. They're great to have on hand when you're putting together a project and need that perfect little something. Your white scraps aren't boring, they're bursting with potential. I hope this sparks some ideas to help you stretch your stash and stay inspired. If you want more easy, creative ways to use what you already have, click this playlist right here. It's packed with mixed media techniques to help you create with confidence. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you're notified every time I upload a video. And as always, don't forget to stay creative, my friends.